1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Topical Talkology talk. Hi, Theo.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
I'm good. You well today, or?
Very well indeed. I would say 99.9% recovered.
Okay, so there's no Chinese virus lingering around you today, eh?
No Chinese. Well, you know, coronavirus. Any medical student or virology student will tell you that's just the common cold.
Okay.
So although of course we're not medically licensed here, but essentially this is just a bad common cold, and we know that colds kill people. In fact, in the longevity study in Sardinia, exercise, diet, control of blood pressure were all important in making people live longer, but more important than those three factors was the flu jab. So this is either just another media storm, or there's some kind of conspiracy theory, because of course Trump is putting sanctions and restrictions on the Chinese, and of course there's a trade war going on. So again,
actually, I thought they just signed. Didn't they just sign the trade deal with China, or not so long ago?
Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because it's a funny one, because I mean, well, look, as we know, the media blow things out of all proportion, and it'll probably lead on to what our topic of our talk today is: why do people do things? And obviously everyone has a very different purpose and a very different reason for doing things. I mean, for example, we just talked about the media. The media does things and actually and blows things out of all proportion, basically, because the more dramatic it sounds, the more capture you will actually get for people to actually or the more attention that you'll get from people, won't you? Because ultimately you want them to read your material, which is the whole essence of having newspapers and media. It's all about figures. It's all about advertising. It's all about things. Not so much for the BBC, even though they do actually also sell a lot of their material abroad, because there's this whole talk right now about whether the TV license should be decriminalised. And in some ways it surprises me, because I'm reluctant to pay my TV license. I know we're getting off track here, and the reason why is because I think that the BBC has become so biased. So when they actually feed their level of propaganda, I'm beginning to wonder, is it actually becoming a little bit more socialist and left-wing in the way that it's actually controlling what it puts out there, but we are actually then forced to have to pay for it? Because at the end of the day, in a society which is free, we should actually have a free choice to be able to do that. Do you not think?
So if you were not to pay it, what would be the key reason that you don't pay it?
What do you mean?
If you decide to break the law and not pay it, what would be the key reason?
Well, the thing is, it's not. I think it's got to do with you not watching the BBC or watching any material on the BBC. But then again, if they then sell it to somewhere like Netflix, for example, I mean, there's one program that comes on the BBC, I think it's called Peaky Blinders, which then gets sold to Netflix. So they're getting they're double dipping in some ways. So we're paying for the TV license for them to make it, so we actually get to watch it, but then they actually then sell it onto somewhere else, and then we actually then have to pay to actually go and watch it on another platform like Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is. So there's no. I mean, I barely watch television anyway, and a lot of the news I watch you could probably access on things like YouTube and things like this. And it's something like Denzel Washington once said. Actually, he says, if you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. If you watch the news, you're misinformed. And I think it's, there's this whole thing that's come out now about fake news, and actually people are beginning to believe it. So people are trusting the media less and less and less. But in terms of things like the BBC, if you actually look over Christmas, the amount of repeat programmes they actually had on, so what are you actually really paying for? There's my little rant about the BBC in that.
So would you not pay it because you come to a cold, calculated decision, or would you not pay it out of anger?
It's not anger, because I'm not angry about it. I'd call it frustration. And the thing is, when you talk about, because our topic is, why do people do things, or what makes people do things?
So frustration is what you call it.
And the thing is, a lot of our decisions are actually based on emotion, whether it is anger, whether it is envy, whether it is frustration and things like this.
Well, that's exactly the point. When you say a lot, that's an understatement. And the reason is this, that as cavemen, In fact, all animals, in order to stay alive, they have a level of arousal. And the more aroused you are, the more skillful you are at staying alive. And in other words, if you see a saber-toothed tiger and you're aroused, you'll quickly spot it and you'll take evasive action reflexly. Because nature worked out that you have to bypass the brain thinking voluntarily because it's quicker to survive that way. So almost all of our behavior is an emotional reaction based on our ancient need to survive by reflex arousal or anxiety reduction.
Well, I mean, look, people make buying decisions based on emotion and they justify it with logic. It's why when you actually walk into a supermarket or a shop, they'll put little cheap items by the counter and things like this because they're called impulse purchases, aren't they?
And that's what Daniel Kahneman says. So you have system 1 thinking, which is emotional, and system 2 thinking, which is logic. And people, 98%, 99% will take their system 1 decisions and use system 2 to justify it. Exactly like, in fact, a court judge during a civil court case when he's providing his summation. I mean, the judge will make what most people see as a decision which is completely nonsensical because the judge is making an emotional decision, and then he spends his entire judgment justifying it.
Well, it's actually there was some interesting research many years ago, actually, and I can't remember where I saw it off the top of my head. But if you, for example, if you were a defendant in court, you've got more chance of getting off if you were actually more attractive and you were better dressed than someone who looked a little bit more thuggish, let's say, or who was a little bit more intimidating.
But that's the same for
regardless of whether the facts were there, because ultimately the judge will actually have there'll be a prejudgment formed. And actually, to actually change that prejudgment takes a long time. It just doesn't happen overnight. So in some ways, when you've got when you're in court, or in places like in court and things like this, and you're actually looking how and basing it on the facts, it becomes very difficult because even in your subconscious mind, you're not even aware that you're actually doing it.
Well, better-looking people are treated better. They're given more pay rises. They're given the benefit of the doubt. They win elections. Americans will choose their leader by the square cut of the jaw.
Well, yes, because a square cut of the jaw actually is identified with strength and things like this. And
so emotion again. It's all emotion.
And this is how you respond to the public. And as I said, it's not necessarily the best candidate who will ever actually get elected or the best person who should become leader of the party. It's the one who's actually most marketable to the public. Mm-hmm. If you actually look back at in the UK, the last Prime Minister who was bald was actually Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. And it was only because his I can't remember who his opposing number was probably just as bald as he was, or bolder than he was
right.
In some ways. And I think in America it was actually Eisenhower, which was 1950s. Mm-hmm. But that was also on the back end of him being a very successful and very popular army general at the time as well, after the Second World War. Which obviously so there's a number of variables that you've actually got to consider. Mm-hmm. But if you actually look at all the leaders in the UK, most of them will actually have a certain appearance. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons why, in some ways, people didn't trust Jeremy Corbyn, apart from his political views, which was one aspect. And as I said, there are many variables. He has a beard. It's not something that is welcomed in the political scene, because one of the things about having a beard, for example, does create a perception that you're hiding your mouth and actually makes you less trustworthy.
Yep.
So there's all these little factors that people don't even realise, because we can sit here and think about it, and we can think about it logically, and you say, well, actually, it doesn't really make sense. But it doesn't happen like that.
Exactly, it's not logical. Now, the research shows that the more intelligent you are, the greater the possibility that you can override your emotional thinking with logic.
Look, okay,
if you're in an emotional state, then nobody can think logically, because you have your amygdala hijack. That's the key point to understand. So if you want someone to respond to you in a logical fashion when they're angry, first of all, they're highly unlikely to do so. But the only thing you can do is reflect their emotion. In other words, if you say, it seems you're really angry, the fact you're labeling it will help drop their amygdala activity, and then they will have a chance of responding to you logically.
You see, because the thing is, because it does, and just to sort of clarify what the amygdala hijack is, it's actually when the limbic system, in effect, because that's where the amygdala is based, actually, because it's been part of our evolution, I suppose, right from the beginning, and the prefrontal cortex is actually quite new to us. It actually hijacks the front of the brain, basically, so you can't actually think rationally, which is why when people are on high emotion, their intelligence tends to be very low. So when we talk about intelligent people, it's not just necessarily about aptitude, because aptitude will give it to you a logic, will give you a knowledge-based information, rationality, I suppose. But when you become emotional, it's the level of emotional intelligence you actually have as well, which is combined, which is why people that have a lot of experience in things, there's an in-between part of the brain called the basal ganglia, which is where when you talk about experts, it's experts who can actually make those decisions under that level of pressure, because it's become part of, you could call it their muscle memory or whatever, but it's been they can instinctively do this because reflex, because they've done it for so long. And that's where their expertise comes in, because anyone can learn knowledge. It's the application of that knowledge and actually being able to being able to apply it in high pressure situations, which determines you as an expert in that subject matter, for example.
Because thinking is notoriously unpredictable, and the only thing that's more certain than thinking is reflex, which is, for instance, why doctors are trained to do the same thing again and again and again, so that in emergency situations they don't think, they just act. Or the same with any emergency profession, whether it's doctors, whether it's ambulance, whether it's firefighters.
Absolutely. There's there's an author, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote I've read several of his books. It wasn't in Blink. I can't remember. Was it in Outliers? And he says it's 10,000 hours to achieve mastery. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that statement, because 10,000 hours to achieve mastery as a doctor is very different to 10,000 hours of achieving mastery as a yoga instructor, for example. There's very different scaling, and it's a sliding scale. So I don't necessarily agree with that statement, but I know what he's actually getting at, or when you're doing it over and over and over again. Because, for example, can a junior doctor who's just come to deal with a surgery, can he actually be able to deal with that to the same extent as someone who's actually been doing it for the last 20 years?
Well,
maybe.
In a straightforward fashion, yes. But if there's an emergency, then no, because the vastly experienced person will reflexly deal with the emergency without thinking, whereas the junior will have to think, and because they're panicking, they're not going to think logically.
So in terms of
and that's why people end up doing things, and when they look back in the cold light of day, they go, why did I do that? Yeah, I know. And the thing is, when we talk about when teenagers do stupid things, for example, and they all do stupid things when they're younger, and the thing is, it's because in some ways they don't actually necessarily learn from it, because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until they're about 21, aren't they? They keep on doing it. So I was listening to a podcast where they were talking exactly about what we're talking about, which is what makes people do things. And there was a lady who was describing the fact that she met someone that she really liked, and there was chemistry, and she had consensual sex, but she didn't want to do it unprotected. But in the heat of the moment, she went straight forward and had unprotected sex. And then afterwards, she was thinking, why did I do what I did? It was great, and I had a lovely time, but I didn't want to do it that way. Then the next time she met this guy, same thing. She was asking herself the same question: why did I do it? And that's because emotion, the amygdala hijack of logic. But when you ask yourself, why did I do it in the cold light of day,